Welcome to our session today. This is going to be a very fresh take on something we have spoken about before, but from a very different perspective. Nicola is going to be taking us through Ecogentic in the context of conversational banking, a very important topic in the space at the moment to really try to progress us to a point in which we can start to use a lot of this generative capability for good and in the best possible ways. All right, so Nicola, over to you.
Great. Let me just share. Thank you for the introduction, Jess. So today we're going to be talking about chatbots. Most people in the audience are probably familiar with chatbots. They sit on most websites and apps as kind of the first point of call for customer engagement. From personal experience, I don't usually go to chatbots for anything complex. I ask it questions that I know it will be able to answer, something simple, something that I could probably find in the FAQs anyway. And I leave the more complex tasks to humans. So we're going to be talking a little bit about why it's have these weaknesses. I'll be starting my presentation by giving a background into large language models, which form the foundation of chatbots, and a history lesson as well. And then Ramsey is going to take us into the more kind of technical side of how you can make generative models more reliable by building agentic frameworks and making chats more valuable for customers. So the earliest forms of language models came about in times of war, where world leaders found that to resolve conflict, people needed to communicate in languages they didn't speak. And they found that with the rise of computers, that maybe there would be a way for computers to translate one human language into another human language. They did this by trying to find mathematical patterns in language and use that to map it onto another language, kind of translate it into maths, and then translate it out of maths into another language. So Joseph Weizenbaum wrote the first natural language processing program called ELIZA in 1966. It sounded like a human. There's also the story of his secretary who had an outburst because of how she was surprised by this computer's empathy. But Weizenbaum was not under any illusion. He famously quoted that in artificial intelligence, machines are made to behave in wondrous ways, often sufficient to dazzle even the most experienced observer. But once a particular program is unmasked, once its inner workings are explained, its magic crumbles away. And that's what I'm about to do with generative AI and large language models. Crumble the magic away. The way the ELIZA program worked was by recognizing a certain keyword and then mapping that onto a corresponding pre-programmed response. So maybe you'd say, hello, and it would return, hello, how are you? And if you entered a keyword that fell anywhere outside of that domain, it wouldn't know how to respond. Modern day large language models are a lot more advanced than that. They take large amounts of text data and learn from information that's spread across the entire internet, specifically ChatGPT. So it's able to return a lot more, but it's still founded on pattern recognition. It's got nothing to do with true understanding. I pulled this from a LinkedIn post from someone from PwC, and I think it quite aptly demonstrates how large language models are a very small portion of what artificial intelligence is. It doesn't really constitute anything intelligent at all, which is what this person also wrote in the LinkedIn post. Large language models are very good at translating text into image or audio into text or 3D models into videos. Its translation capabilities can go as far as being able to translate DNA into music. I wrote this thing about how genetic sequencing forms a pattern that's mapped onto sounds in certain large language models. So it's very good at that, but still it has nothing to do with recognizing what's true, what's accurate, and really understanding what you're saying. Because humans are easily fooled by something that looks and sounds like them. They think it's intelligent, actually isn't. So if you want to find out more about that, Jess or Maddie, if you could please pop a link to my blog. It's called Conversations Between Humans and Machines, and it talks more about the history of large language models and the inconsistencies between human language and computer language and how they are not remotely related. Large language models form the basis of chatbots. You are probably most familiar with ChatGPT, and GPTs are a special form of large language model, and it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And it's essentially a pattern recognition machine. It takes large amounts of data, in this context, text data, and based on the patterns that it recognizes, it generates the most likely next token. A token is not necessarily a word. It could be a few letters within a word, breaking words into smaller pieces. When you give it an input, its goal is not to make sense of what you're actually saying, but to generate a response that would most likely make sense based on all the data that it's been trained on. Yeah, so I think there are also lots of different kinds of chatbots. So there's chatbots that are based on rules, which is kind of the most basic form of a chatbot, where the user, it kind of functions similarly to how Eliza functioned, where the user says something and then the model is told, if the user says this, then you need to return this. It's basically going to answer questions found in FAQs and nothing much else. Then you get keyword-based ones, which is similar to where it recognizes a certain keyword and returns the corresponding response. Then there's retrieval-based, which uses machine learning to fetch the most appropriate response. And then there's generative. Generative is all about generating new content. It sounds a lot more exciting because every response is different and it has the ability to be personalized to the user, but it still doesn't have enough controls to make sure that it's accurate. This has had some consequences. There was a survey released by Forrester Consulting in November 2022 that said that although customers really want to use chatbots, only 75% of them agree, about 75% of them agree that chatbots aren't able to handle complex questions. So that means only 25% would go to chatbots for that, and then would probably come away with a negative interaction. And it also really does affect the customer experience and their likelihood to return to a brand. About a third of customers said they would take their purchase to the competition if they had a negative experience with a chatbot. So it really does show that chatbots have a lot of potential to make or break your business, especially because a lot of interaction now takes place in digital environments. So there are some pros and cons. Chatbots are always available. They respond really quickly. And if you build in recommenders, they can increase sales with personal recommendations. A lot of them lack empathy. They're not able to recognize when a human would do better in a certain conversation. They don't have enough roots to speak to a human agent. They can't detect your true intention. So you can ask a question over and over again, and it might just return complete nonsense. And there's obviously a lot of security risks. So chatbots providing you with false information that then leads you to make decisions that have adverse consequences. And this is an ongoing challenge for a lot of businesses. The crux of this is that large language models don't work for customer engagement by themselves. Companies need to have a lot more control over the customer journey. If we consider this in the context of banking, where chatbots are a lot of the time, consider what you do when you don't know how to do something in a banking app. You would most likely go to the website and look through the FAQs, or you just randomly click around on your app to see if you can find what you're looking for. Jess, you shared a story the other day about how you were trying to look up something, but then you didn't even know what it was you had to look up and just happened to stumble upon your answer. And so what if you had the ability to talk to a chatbot that could give you the answer to those questions and recommend the best course of action, and then also recommend something that you hadn't even thought of before? This is possible when you use agentic AI. And agentic AI was created to solve the weaknesses of generative AI. So I will let Ramsey talk about the tech more. He's going to take us through our Ecogentic AI agent builder, and he's going to show us a little bit about our Ecogentic chat app as well, which is available. It is open source. I will find the links and drop them in the chat if any of you want to download it on your Apple or Android. I'm going to hand over to Ramsey now.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicola. Appreciate the introduction. Yeah, so like Nicola said, we're going to do a quick demo showcasing how to engage a customer with generative banking, conversational banking, which merges a lot of the generative stuff along with recommendation and kind of pipelining to allow you to deal with a customer in a way that's useful for them. So I like to think of it when you're using an app, you are forcing the customer to deal with your company in a way that suits you. With conversational banking or conversational AI, you allow the customer to deal with your organization, in this case, a bank, in a way that fits them. A lot of specific kind of jargon or lingo that you use internally in a company might not be straightforward for the layman users. Sometimes even more complicated things, you might know what you want, you just don't know the exact keyword, or it might be conflating some keywords with other ones. When you try to Google something, you don't even know what to Google, or the app is just not giving the answers that you want, and you have to either go and call someone in the organization that many people are not that keen on. First off, I'm just going to show you what the demo looks like. Yeah, Nicola did mention phone app that you can use. I'm just going to use our web browser version. The backend connects to the same API endpoints, but yeah, the app is just looks a bit different than this. The first thing, our customer comes in. This is going to be a known customer. Just come in and say hello. This is our generative AI. It knows some information about this customer, like that this customer's name is Jane. Just give them some generic greeting and then kind of suggest a few things that they might like to do. So first off, we maybe don't want to use the word balance. Maybe we as a customer don't know what balance means. We are very, very straightforward, and we just want to know how much money do I have. Before I run this, I just want to talk a bit to what will happen when I type this now. The first thing that happens when I type this is that a intent detection engine is going to run. It's going to try and figure out from what I have typed here, what am I trying to do? So we have at the back end set up a lot of potential routes, depending on your intent. If any of those routes are triggered by the intent detector, it will then go and do a specific function. In this case, we have a route called balances, and it should be able to detect from this query that we are trying to figure out something about my balances. That's first doing the intent detection, and then it's going to do a data retrieval and display our information here. What's important to note is when we run this kind of function of the agent, it's not at all generative in that sense. Because we are trying to get realistic, real data here, we can't rely on generative AI to make up something for us. So we just ask this question, how much money do I have? It's either going to tell you, I don't know what you're talking about, or it's going to tell you some arbitrary number that is of no use. Now we can see this user has two accounts, a current and a credit account with some money in it. We have a reminder system also linked into this. This recommender system looks at all of the banking products that the customer currently has, and then tries and recommends it a product that you don't have already. There's a two-layer recommendation. After it decides on the product to recommend, it also decides on the right messaging for the customer. In this case, it just says, can I do something else for freedom and flexibility?
And maybe you will explain this more when you go into the backend side of things. But intent detection is basically about setting a context by setting boundaries for a certain node, right? So
no, so that you're conflating two ideas. There's context, conversational context that you can set, and there's also intent detection as a separate process. So I'll get to that context setting when I look deeper into the code.
This journey is pre-configured, so this is not necessarily what it would look like. This is because you've set it up to be this way, right? Yeah.
So that is, so you can set it up in many different ways. This is just a particular kind of banking demo I'm showing you. Our customer might want to, instead of just looking at the balances, look at their individual transactions. Sorry, just a second. Say something like, I want to look at the transactions on my credit account, look at all the individual payment lines or whatever. But you might just want to ask it more casually. You can just say, give me the transaction, just look at transactions, because I just say something around the line of how much have I spent. The important is that to note also with the intent detection that leverages LLMs. So the ability to take, like I said, it's like a transformer. It takes the concept of the query that I have and transforms it into intent. So it knows that I give it a list of intents that if that intent comes up, I'm interested in doing something particular with that. So it's essentially a prompt that says something along the line, given this query, try and fit it into these groups. It's transforming a set of text into another set of text. And then triggering a function based on that. So in this case, we're saying how much have I spent. This thing is now detected that I'm trying to do something transactional or look at my transactions. And now it kicks off this process and it's like, oh, well, I haven't mentioned a particular account that I'm interested in looking at transactions. So it wants me to verify like what account I'm trying to look at. So I'm looking at the current account. It's going to do another data retrieval, and here we can see all of the transactions I've made over time. Once again, I get another ad there. In this case, we got bored of writing all the ad messages, so we just see saving message 2. And it's going to ask us another question. Now, another thing that you might want to do is kind of make a payment. Granted, like this is just some examples that we have, but you can build this out as far as you want to and make it as complicated as you want to. In this case, I want to pay someone. In this case, it's not going to ask me. The detection is running. It's realizing I want to make some kind of payment. If you want to make a payment, you need to pay from some account. What account do you want to pay from? I want to pay from, let's say, my credit account. Now it needs more information. I haven't given all the information to make this payment. Where do you want to pay this to? Can I either select some beneficiary, but let's just make an inter-account payment and just send it to my current account? How much money do I want to pay? Let's make it 1, 2, 3 so we can recognize it quickly. And now it's detected that everything looks like there's a lot of validation also happening at these steps. So if you type in anything incorrectly, it will then just say like, oh, this doesn't make sense. So if the amount to pay, if you just type like 3, then it will not know what that means as a number. It'll ask you just to give a better answer or get an answer that makes sense in the context. But now it's just checking, am I happy with the payment I've set up here? I say, yes, sure. I'm happy with that. Now it tells me, cool, that payment has been made. And now if you want to, we can let's just save some time and just type in transactions. We just want to check to see if that payment is reflected on our accounts. Interesting, in this case, that the intent detection actually did not like that word. So let's use that saying that we used earlier, how much have I spent? So that single word got not picked up as spent by the intent detection, which is always going to be an ongoing trial and error, is to make sure that your intent detection prompt is proper and that all your groupings are sensibly spaced out in a way that you won't have overlapping groups.
Yeah, but the only risk here is really that it will return, I don't know, response, not something completely nonsensical.
Depending on how you set up your generative AI, the context, it can either give you very specific information or very generic information. So you can contextualize it as much as you see fit. Let's see if we got some extra money in our current account.
But this also, I mean,
and now we can see that reflected over there, which is great.
When we think about chatbots in the kind of traditional sense, like you go and you ask a question and it answers, but this presents a whole new way of doing banking. And that's where the term conversational banking comes from. You can actually do actions by having a conversation. The nice thing about this way of banking is that it's completely customer-led. When you're interacting with an app or website, it's predetermined how you do things and where you go. Whereas with a chat, the customer leads it.
Jess, I see you have the hand up.
Hey, so Nicola's obviously talking about it being a completely different way in which you do banking. And it just occurred to me that I recently had a thing with my bank where I wanted to add someone as a sort of access partner to my account. And it took me about an hour to figure out how to do this because I didn't know the right word that they had listed, add user. Was it add collaborator on my account? Is it add user to my account? Is it add partner to the account? It took me a very long time to ultimately get to that point. So this feels like a great and intuitive way to kind of figure out how to solve problems that you wouldn't otherwise know how to solve because you don't have the right lingo.
Yeah, so that's the whole idea behind the intent detection. The intent detection is only as strong as you set it up to be. If there are edge cases that you have not thought of, you need to predetermine what functionality you want the customer to have access to and set those up in your intent detections to be handled in specific ways. But once you have that down, if a customer doesn't know the exact lingo, you could say something like, I want my spouse to be able to access my account. Then you could very easily take that and say like, oh, you want to do add user. Because they're leveraging the power of the generative AI, the LLMs, to be able to take that text or that query and transform it into what our internal lingo is in a sensible and quick way. And just another one that's just to show you at the end, this all kind of comes back to a generative AI. So this one's be saying no thanks because they're asking, do you have any other questions? This is a completely generated response here. It just says, all right, again, just have a great day. Very nice. But then just to show you guys a bit of what the backend looks like, just to give you a bit of sense of how this is set up. It'll be a bit daunting to look at first. But essentially, we have a directed non-cyclical graph, can be cyclical, directed cyclical graph. And there's a bunch of nodes. Each node is an action point. Something happens at that point, and after it's done doing something, it's going to be routed to another node to do some other functionality. So as we see here, this is our starting point over here. So come up, there's a hello message, and we immediately get routed to this chat node. So this chat node is our kind of key word that we use for the generative stuff, for any LLM generative thing. They all have this built-in detection functionality. So whenever a query is made in the context of a chat node, it will first do intent detection and see if the question has to do with balance, transactions, payments, products, or done. It will route it and perform the function. If it doesn't, it's just going to talk to that generative AI and process that query and return a result that is sensible based on that query. Nicola also mentioned earlier, you can contextualize these chat nodes to only know about specific things. If you don't set any context, it's just going to be a generic AI with all the information available to it that it has, and it can be very easy to generate nonsense. You can set context. If we go to our fact injection, you'll see we have a bunch of predefined contexts here, but you can obviously set up as many contexts you want, and they all limit the ability for the chat node to do specific things. So limit is maybe not the right word, but it focuses it on specific information. So you can set it as a vector lookup where you just have a lot of data or information that you want the customer to have access to. This is a good place to put in the company website or a lot of FAQs where they can just query specific questions. And if the information is not in that data corpus, it will just say, I couldn't find it based on my data that I had. But otherwise, it will return very accurate information that is specific to your data that you prepared for it. Additional things you can do is text-to-SQL stuff, where you can allow the customer to essentially generate queries to sample data. So it's a bit dangerous is not the right word, but it's just that customer can then change their data in very specific ways. Obviously, it's all restricted just to that particular customer, but still you might not want to give them the ability to do that because it might not display in ways that you want to show the customers. It might hinder the customer's journey, but it might be better just to be more specific about how you want to do it. So have when an intent detection triggers, a particular API go off that query specific data that you are sure is going to return in a specific way.
We have some questions in the chat. I think you might have addressed a bit of it now. The first one is, how do you handle edge cases? This is from Gabriella. How do you handle edge cases your intent detection didn't anticipate, and how quickly can you update those routes?
Yeah, so like I said, it's an iterative process. So you are obviously, when you're setting up this initially, you're going to try and set up as many of these kind of intent detection routes that you can. If you miss any of them, you'll see a customer perhaps ask a question. All of the information and queries are logged, so you can look back in time and see what people are asking questions about. We see there are questions coming up regularly that you did not take into account. It is literally as quick as I can show you how quick it is to add a route. I can just go add route, say here, call it hello. I have a new route here. I can now go and make it do something specific over there. And I just save it, and that's updated. Obviously, depending on the function that route has, it might be a bit more complicated. So you need to set up a bit more nodes in the row here. But just to show you the generics of how we go about doing that. Second question is, what guardrails ensure the agent only uses real account data for action, not generated? So that is essentially what the whole intent detection is about, right? It is so that when a customer asks something like, I want to make a payment, instead of staying in the generative context, I'm going out of it. If payments are happening, it's going down over here. Where is it going down over here? The first thing it's doing a lookup to see all the accounts that you have that you can potentially make a payment from. Then it is asking, what accounts do you have access to? And it's saying, okay, let's display a message. It says select the account. It's displaying all of that accounts in a repeated list. Then they can potentially select a thing. There's also ways to get out of this to go back to where you were. There's a lot of conditional things happening here to make sure that your selections are valid, that you're not making impossible selections here. And all of these questions about where it's sending to, what you're going to pay. You can see there's a lot of functions happening here that's completely not generating. This is sending me specific messages because this is all very technical query based, like where, what, how questions that we don't want the generative AI to make up. And once we are done with the specific part of the journey, we go back to the generative part where they can then become more open with the queries. So that's kind of the balance you want to play here, is when you want to allow the generative agent to be more free form of its language, when it's not important or not legally required for it to be specific. There are requirements for it to be very particular. Then you go down a route where it becomes very specific and you look up data, you present data in a specific way, and you make sure that that's important. Gabrielle, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much.
I was busy showing the contextual stuff. So there's contextual stuff that I have here. You can add the context here. I look up whatever names I have over here. I don't remember, where was that one about the spend personality? Just take that name. That's in here. Now that I set this up to have information about the spend personality, now when I query it, obviously this is not anything to do with banking. We just took a random one here. This is information about one of our internal functions in the ecosystem platform. And it just has like essentially a FAQ about all the ways that it works and how you can use it. You can set up the contexts as any way you want to. In this case, we just have a blank one, so you can ask it very generic questions. I don't think I want to go too deep into this because this is not an Ecogentic demo. This is more a conversational banking demo. I don't know if there's any additional questions from the audience. I think we covered the majority of what I wanted to show.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we look back into history and the very beginnings of artificial intelligence and what people thought intelligence was and how that's evolved with large language models. It's one functionality that is now being used for a bunch of different things. But to me, this looks closer to what intelligence should be. It's a network of different functionalities, and the intelligence comes in when you're able to route a request to a specific function and then to another one and another one. It's a combination of different capabilities coming together, not just one being applied.
Yeah, as I see it, I think the word intelligence is a bit loaded.
Yeah.
I think what's important here is that we are combining the strengths of a lot of disparate tools. So we're going, what is LLMs? What is ChatGPT good at? It's good at structuring sentences. It's good at understanding how language gets put together. But when we want to create flowery responses or just have like a conversation with a customer, perfect, use that. It's not good at doing specific things like tell me what my bank account balances are. So when we want to do that, then let's go away from ChatGPT and go into API lookups, recommenders, machine learning, all of these more, some people would consider like lower level AI things, but it's all very powerful and useful and good at giving you specific, particular good
Like
answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just merging that together in a sensible way. The key to that sensible connection is intent detection, to allow you to understand what a customer is actually talking about. And if they're talking about something that needs to be handled particularly, then move them away from the chat context and into a functional context.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting to see this coming into reality. I put a link in the chat if anyone wants to check out the Ecogentic chat. It is completely open source.
I think it's important, Nicola, that for the, if I don't remember incorrectly, we were both Android and Apple, but I think for the Android one, you need to be particularly added to like a list to be able to access the app. The Apple, you can just go to the App Store and get it, but with the Android one, we have to add your email address somewhere. So someone just need to let us know if you want to play with it first.
Yeah, I think what we can do is if anyone wants access to it, there is an email address in the chat, amy@ecosystem.ai. And then you can just pop in your preference, whether you want Android or Apple, and then we can send the link directly to you. Download it, and we will have to add you to a network as well.
The app I just showed now was just for the backend, but the app allows you to connect to multiple instances of kind of LLM. So you have like a Llama there and ChatGPT and blanking now, name all the different ones. We have like 6 or 7 different configurations of LLM set up that you can query. One of the options is to connect to this banking app. I'm going to play around with it.
Yes, and each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Some sound a little more formal, some more casual. So they all have different purposes you can play around with. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about anything that we've discussed?
It's quite interesting that it was led on from what you said, Nana, about some of them being casual and some more formal. At what point in this journey could you ultimately change? My question is, based on a customer's spend personality, can you change the personality of this agent that they're interacting with in order to match or mimic that energy of the customer?
Yeah,
so
definitely. That I showed before was the kind of context setting that you can do. So you can have that context setting be, instead of being like a vector store lookup, that context setting can be speak to this customer in a jovial tone. And then just before you set up or you can then set up multiple chat interfaces or chat nodes. And then before that, you just have a conditional check to see, given this customer's past spending history, it can also be a recommender instead of a conditional thing. We just check the level. You can recommend this customer a particular style of chat experience based on their spend history. And then you can use things like how long they are on the platform or how quickly they are performing actions as your metrics for whether or not they liked that particular format of chat. There can be very heavy thinking around what does a good interaction look like on a banking app? Is it them just clicking on it, or is it them staying around a long time and trying all the different things out?
Yes. I feel like it's a good way to give the customer an opportunity, at least in the initial phases or the initial interactions, like just a little note or an inset there saying, does this tone work for you? Did you know that you can make me, the agent, more suited to your needs? Do you want me to be professional or fun or whatever the case is? I think you can also have a lot of that power put back into the hands of the customer. So it's not just, okay, cool, like I'm determining what you should be seeing and that's it. Because people love that customization, right? They love the ability to say, okay, cool, I want to configure the way that I interact with my bank. We intelligently pick up on the important aspects of that, but also give them an opportunity to frame it as well.
I think there's a nice balance between allowing the customer to configure it the way they want versus automatically adjusting it in a way that would be better for them without them perhaps noticing it or getting upset. All of a sudden your bank talks to you in a completely different tone. You might be confused.
Yes.
You need to either do it subtly or let them know in some way that it's changing. Like I said before, you can make this as complicated or as simple as you want. Just depends on what you want to take into account and how much power do you want to give the customer versus how pigeonhole do you want to make them?
But what's so
It's
nice about this structure is that the opportunities are endless, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could start off with something really simple, and as you start to learn about what customers are doing in the space and how they're interacting with it, and noticing if enough people happen to be asking about the weather halfway through the chats, to maybe have that as a fun little side quip and gimmick about it. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities.
I think a lot of deployments will look like you will have your first based attempt, and then as people are interacting with you, might notice shortcomings like, oh, yes, people are not happy about this particular part of the journey. Then you can either, if you know the right answer, you can just go out and fix it immediately. Or if you're not sure what would be the best way to fix it, you can then add in some A/B testing around that part of the journey, split the customers, say 80% of people use the old way and 20% use the new way. There's a new group of people are having a better experience, then you can switch over. There's a lot of iteration you can do to gradually grow the agent into the best possible version of what it can be.
Yeah. And I think something like this also being launched is novel, right? I mean, especially from a customer's perspective. And if you give customers the opportunity to sort of opt in to this, then if there are annoyances and shortcomings within the structure of the thing, I think the customers that opt into that are more likely to say, okay, cool, like I'm flagging this as an error rather than it being full on complaints. The structure that is in place currently works, so let's leave it as that, but then sort of phase in and introduce this.
But also not just from them logging it as an error as complaining. You might also see that people are dropping off. You might see in most functional processes, you'll see that, okay, 40% of people who start a particular function completed. But in this other case, only 10% of people completed. So is that just a function of the function? Like, do not a lot of people like to finish that function? Or is it because there's something in that path of that function that's just wrong, or that confuses people, upsets them? So that can kind of lead you to go investigate and see why are people abandoning that part of the journey, and what can you do to make it better. You don't need people to actively complain. You can just see with how they use the app, or how they use the agent, that something is wrong in certain places.
We did a meetup in, I think it was 2022. I think it was in 2022. We did a meetup on, exactly this sort of that progression from what it was like in a trade era. You and one other person, and you had something to trade, and there's that unique relationship, to then having the form of the original banker and a couple of customers, but always within the 5s or the 10s, and how that's completely transformed over the years to a point where everybody's like, okay, cool, now I'm just numbers. And with the whole chatbot environment, you ultimately aren't just a number, right? Press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or respond with this. Nicola, you did a post recently about everybody's been there. You ask the chatbot something, and it just sends you in this endless loop. Taking a step towards conversational banking feels like doing that full circle, where your bank, which is actually just your app, can function as this personal banker for everybody.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that adding of the functional to the chat part of it is novel, and potentially people will be scared of it in the beginning, going like, why is this thing trying to do something? But I think in very something simple to maybe dissuade people, dissuade is, I mean, not the right word, but just to, with your current banking stuff, if you do anything, you usually get this pop-up that says like some transaction is happening, you need to accept it. So same thing if your chat, like once you've said like, oh, I want to make a payment to X for 100 Rand, pop-up from your app comes up and says, oh, it looks like you're trying to spend $100, click accept. And that's a familiar thing that you've seen on your app before. Just to not feel like some random thing is trying to steal all my money or send money somewhere that I don't want them to send it.
Yeah, it has to, I think, as Jay spoke about when we were talking about this, has to essentially be granny proof. Like someone who doesn't know how to use technology, it needs to be able to lead you while also letting you lead the interaction.
I don't think it's lead you, but you lead the app. Just make sure that you don't fall into it.
Yeah, but the fact that it can make recommendations and stuff, I think, is also quite an exciting part of it. It's nice that our talk about conversational banking ended with a conversation
about banking.
So I think there's no harm in ending 4 minutes early. I really enjoyed this session. And make sure to check out the blogs if you are interested in this topic. We will be back here, same place, same time next week.